Welcome to part 2 of the wire inlay video. In the first video we covered how to transfer the artwork to the material as well as some of the tools to use. This video will start immediately showing the stabbing in process and then continue with flushing the wire inlay to the wood as well as a few additional tips. Thanks for watching. When you're doing the stabbing in, particularly the first cut, maintain a straight down vertical cut into the wood. Now that I've made the first cut, I'm going to go back and follow it to make it a little deeper. And this time you've got a channel, a pre-stabbed channel that you just keep the tool centered in. Again, keeping it vertical. You notice how when I start off with a stab, I'm starting on the edge of that tool. Think of that, again, that tool's like the nose of a football. I'm starting out on the edge, and as I go vertical, I'm bringing the tool to the center or the point or the end of the football, so to speak. Now, because of the size of this tool and the size of the inlay that we're doing, I didn't quite, the geometry of the tool prevents me from getting right up to the edge. So I'm going in with a smaller tool and coming right down at the end of the cut to ensure that I've got a 90-degree edge at the start and at the finish of the artwork. Now, because this tool is smaller, more pointed than the first stabbing tool I used, I can achieve a greater depth because of the smallness or the pointedness of the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and go all the way down the stab end just to ensure that I've got enough depth. So at this point, if you did a cross section of the wood, this was our first cut, and then when I followed it with the smaller tool, I increased the depth of the V. And now we're going to go in with the screwdriver type tool to put this little channel at the bottom of the V for the wire to fit into. See, the tip of this tool is so fine and so small, it initially, when you place it into the cut, you've got all kind of room, and the tool is bottom. When you first go in, the edge of the stabbing tool bottoms out on the V. So as I push down and stab in with this tool, I'm forming that rectangle at the bottom for you guys that's done videos. I find it very difficult to talk and work at the same time, but it is what it is. Okay, now how deep is that groove? Let's show you how I do that. Just got a small piece of silver wire here. What I'm going to do is make sure the end of it is square. So I'll go in and clip it off with the scissors. So I clipped it crooked. Let's try it again. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is insert this thin piece of wire vertically down into the channel that I stabbed, and then I'm going to take, and with my scribing tool here, laying flat or laying flush, I go in and scribe a line across the silver. And I'm going to mic it and see what the depth is. Okay, I've got about between 75 76 thousandths. So that's a good depth. And hopefully, as I was going through stabbing in, I didn't overlap or miss any parts. It's always a good idea just to go back and you don't have to stab, but just go and feel the bottom. And by looking at the side of the tool, sometimes I will put a bright or red magic marker on the side, so I've got a visual indication of how deep that tool's going down into the channel. It appears to be uniform and of the same depth, so let's stick a piece of wire in it. To size the wire, I just, as roughly as I can, stick it in there and pick up the geometry, and I want to overcut it so that it's a little longer than required. So I've trimmed it off, and now I'm going to stick it in, and it's going to be too long, but we'll pull it out and trim it. So using a pair of tweezers. Now on complex shapes, you could go in and pre-form the wires. On this particular shape here, it's not that difficult to pre-form the wire in the geometry of your stab mark. Looking, that's another, oh, here we go. Here's an example. This was a section of the wire that I did on the spoke shaving, and the first attempt it was too short, so I had to discard this. But you see, you can form and shape the wire, pre-form it, or a lot of guys would just start at the one end and just work it around as they go. So we'll try to get it in the end, get it to follow and drop down into the stab mark. And if I turn it sideways here with the scribe, I'll go in and visually see where the stab ends on the wire and mark, put a little scratch mark on the wire, bring it out and trim it with the scissors. Now if you think about it, if you err on cutting the wire a little too short within reason, it's not the end of the world, because once the wire is wet, if there's a void out there where the wire didn't fill it, it's going to close up once you wet the wood. I'm still just a little short. Let me take just a little bit more off of that. Sometimes instead of cutting this perpendicular, I'll put a little taper on it, like a tapered dowel, so that it will start, and once it gets started. But you should be able to put that wire in there just like that. It's standing up, you can see the side view, and it should be able to stay in there by itself. I have two hammers here. My official goat head, Delrin headed goat hammer. So I'll get it started with this, and then get my little lightweight ball peen hammer. I don't know where I got this guy years ago, but it's a really sweet small hammer. And if you listen, you'll hear a sound change once the wire hits the bottom. It'll be a different pitch. That sound right there pretty much tells me that the wire is bottomed out, and it looks pretty good. Now, one thing that you can do after after you check the depth of your stabbing, and let's say it's 40 thousandths and your wire's 110 thousandths wide. Well, just draw scribe your line on the wire and go in and trim it off with a pair of scissors. And that way, you know you got a thick enough piece of ribbon wire to go into the hole and still leave you a surplus. And it'd be less trimming. The problem with trimming, the way I did it for years with chisels, scrapers, and files, etc., it's really easy to fold over and damage this wire that's sticking up. That's why I like the little sanding disc and to be able to flush them off with that. Okay, we're going to get some of that wet material referred to as saliva. And quite honestly, I prefer using saliva because it tends to have a thicker consistency. And for whatever reason today, I got a dry mouth and I don't have an abundance of it, but we'll let that dry. And usually, you know, if you're doing a really critical piece, my recommendation would be once you wet it to lock the wood in, wait a couple hours. For the demo here, we're probably going to push it a little bit and do it a lot sooner. Okay, one point, at this point, when the wood is wet, I'm going to add a little real water to this thing, just because I don't feel like it's wet enough. Probably put a little too much. Okay. At this point in the process, if you vertically inspect the inlay, it should be pretty much vertical. Now when you hammered it in, if you got the wire crooked and it's leaning one way or the other, what I do is take a punch, the right diameter, or a larger diameter, and I'll put it on the ribbon wire that's sticking up, and one way or the other use that punch as a stop. And what I'm doing is with a piece of bamboo, I'm going in and straightening out that ribbon so it's vertical. And also, by doing this, if you have any dog legs or flat spots that was caused by sloppy stabbing or an oops, by using the bamboo push rod up against the ribbon and backing it to limit your, to give you some back support, you can actually manipulate and fine tune that ribbon wire. But this is the only chance that you get to do it. It's when you first put it in, the wood is wet, it hasn't set enough, and the wood is still flexible because it's wet, and using the bamboo push stick to keep from, you know, marring or denting the inlay, which, you know, it really shouldn't matter because it's going to be filed off. But it's just a more gentle push tool than, say, doing it with a, you know, another center punch or a piece of dowel rod. Now, here's something. For years, I used to use a brass cartridge. I would pinch the end of it for cleaning my files until I discovered that a bamboo stick makes an even better file cleaner. It gets down into the grooves and pushes out any swarf or clogging that's in the file. And as you go along, what will happen, just like on the cartridges, you will form teeth in this end of this bamboo, so then it just becomes a lot easier for it to lay down in those teeth and push out the swarf. So this is a dual purpose tool. Piece of bamboo. Go get some Chinese food tonight. Okay, now that our wire inlay has dried, we're ready for the last operation of sanding it down and making it flush with the wood. I'm going to use the Moto 2 with a sanding disc. Let's give it a try. In doing this sanding operation, you don't want to get too aggressive. Occasionally check the piece of silver to see that it's not getting too hot. Just take it slow. I'm probably down to the point now there's 6 or 7 thousandths of the wire sticking up, so we're getting real close to having it flush. Okay, that should do it. Again, you're not gonna. Let me zoom in and get a closer shot here, but you're not gonna really see it jump out at you until we put some stain on there. But what I want to do first is follow this. I think that was 220 grit that I used for cutting it down. Let's take another sanding disc here that's a little finer grit, and because you'll be able to see some scratch marks on it in the current state. Okay, used a dirty disc. So let's just make a quick pass with the scraper and get that dirt off the wood before we put some stain on it. Got a nice shiny piece of silver inlay. Let's put a little stain here, bring it out where you can see it better. Okay, there we go. That pretty much covers the process of doing the wire inlay. I had a thought while I was waiting on the wire to dry, a couple of points I'd like to point out before we close the video out. Is one, when I'm making the stabbing tools or carving tools out of 01, piano wire, etc., Once I get them shaped and pretty much to the final form, I take a block of beeswax and I heat the steel for the stabbing tool or the carving tool to cherry red, and I dunk it into, I just plunge it into this block of beeswax. What that does is it hardens and tempers the tool at the same time. It's an old trick an engraver taught me years ago for treating hand engravers. I understand this process has been around for quite a while, but it's very effective, and I encourage you to try it and see. I think you'll like the results. Now, another thing is on whether you're doing wire inlay, stabbing the part in, or doing engraving. One of the most difficult tasks to perform is doing a straight line, because any margin, any deviation from your line or your artwork really stands out. When I was building the Kentucky long rifles, up on the forearm of the rifle, we had what was referred to as an incise line that ran pretty much the length of the forearm. And in order to do an incise cut, the first operation you had to perform was score a line that you could come up to with a sharp chisel and give the effect of a raised line. It's called an incise cut. The curly woods and the difficult grains, this was a difficult task to achieve, not only on the full-size rifles, but on the smaller ones it became even more critical. So what I did, relying on an old watchmaker's trick, they used this in watch and clockwork for years. They would take a double-sided razor blade and put it in a vise, and with a fine file, they would tap it into the sharp edge of the blade and convert that cutting edge into a miniature or a micro saw. And what I've done is done that process on some X-Acto knives, or it applies to any knife that's got a sharp edge on it. This process of converting a sharp knife into a miniature saw, there's two ways I've done it. The first way I would do it is put the blade in a machinist vise and get it real close to the jaws, tighten it, and using an extra double tapered triangle file that was primarily used for sharpening small back saws. It's a very small triangle saw file. The configuration you look for on the teeth of the file, you want a file that's got real fine close lines, but you also want a mill bastard style cut. And that's what you have on the three sides of this saw file. What you do is lay it up, one flat side, you lay it up on the sharp edge of the knife and gently tap it. And what that does, that forces the teeth of the file down into the sharp edge of the blade and swedges in or forms teeth on that sharp blade. The only second op required is to take a hard Arkansas stone and gently wipe the two sides to remove any metal that got swedged out or displaced as the teeth were formed into that sharp edge. Not a lot of force, just gently rub it down there and then feel, and you should not feel any swedge or any metal that got displaced when the teeth were formed. Another way of doing it is if you've got an extra fine knurl, fine tooth knurl, put this in a pin vise around the shaft so it rotates. You can bring the knurl up to the blade and roll it across the blade back and forth, putting moderate down pressure on the knurl, so you're going to cut and knurl teeth into the edge of this. The advantage of having a blade like this is when you want to do a long straight line, instead of the sharp edge of the knife following the grain, you're actually sawing. The advantage of converting this, what was a knife, into a saw, it gives you the ability to score or draw a straight line with a lot more precision than you could do with a knife or a straight edge. I'm going to scribe 4 lines, just eyeballing the separation. We'll rotate it and scribe across it with 4 more lines to form a series of diamonds. As you start pulling the saw, you rotate it up so that it follows the curvature of the blade. This concept of putting teeth into a sharp blade, it works a lot better on a curved blade than it does on a flat blade, because you have that ability to kind of roll your cut as you're pulling the saw. Also, it makes it easier to swedge in and form the teeth. Well, I guess with that, we're going to call it a day. Hope you enjoyed the video and picked up a few pointers. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we have many more videos planned for the near future.